You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
When the pandemic, finally the worst of it started to lift, restrictions started to be less so, I had one of my first in-person client meetings with a prospective leader for whom I was trying to do a large-scale training project. This was in person. I'm meeting with him. I give him 15 minutes of what I would describe as my finest sales pitching. I spent 14 years in staffing. You know, your girl knows how to sell. I'm like, okay, I got it. I'm nailing this. He puts his hand up in front of his face and I'm like, yes. And I give him a massive high five. And his eyes literally kind of go glazed. And he looks at me and goes, Henna, I was putting my hand in front of my face because I was trying to get you to stop. And I was like, oh my God, I have completely forgotten how to human. I've completely forgotten how to human. And this seems like a nice moment to remind folks, this is not just for introverts. I am an extrovert. The very first thing I said as soon as I could get something out of my mouth was, wow, that was awkward. Super cringe. I'm so sorry.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you. Henna, welcome to the show. Happy Friday. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited. I got my Capri Sun here ready to go because I saw your TEDx talk. For people who don't get that inside joke, go check out Henna's TEDx talk on awkwardness. But we're going to cover awkwardness and the tie-in to being a better risk taker and kind of going at aligning with who you are and your improvement. And I thought the topic was really interesting, this idea of awkwardness. I want to start with my awkward story from last night. And then Henna, I'm going to have you share an awkward story. So last night I'm at Panera with the kids and my wife, and we're having dinner. And we didn't have enough room at our table. So I go sit at a different table next to our family. And I am wearing like really short shorts. I've got two piles of food next to me because I eat a lot. And my wife just looks at me and like starts, ripping on me. And she looks to my sons and she says like, how come you guys are defending him? Like, why aren't you on my side? And my middle son goes, he's just weird. There's nothing we can do about it.
Kids are so honest. I love it.
They're so honest. And they haven't thought about the social norms thing, which we'll get into. But I wanted to share that because I consider myself a pretty awkward guy, or at least like I'm not afraid to be awkward. But your story around awkwardness, and if you haven't seen the TEDx talk, is really interesting. Can you share with us how you got the name Helen and tell our audience a little bit about your awkward story?
Oh, I have a lot of awkward stories, but the one that you're referring to is, my first job out of college. So like you, I am a career breaker. I've pivoted my career a couple times, but my first job out of college was at a large Big Four public accounting firm. With a finance major, I got hired at Ernst & Young. And I remember one of my first weeks on the job, my partner on the engagement was asking me, to do something with a work paper. And he kept calling me Helen. And just in case anyone didn't catch it, my name is Henna, not Helen. But he kept calling me Helen. And I did not correct him. I didn't correct him. I was new. He was a big deal, right? The partner's not always out at the projects. And I didn't correct him. And this went on for months because by that point, I'm like, I can't tell him my name is Henna now. What is he going to think, right? I've been sitting here letting him call me that for how long? It's going to be even more awkward if I say something now. And so really my exploration with awkwardness is a series of stories like that, where, I had to kind of do a weighing of, should I have said something then? Should I have said something later? All of it feels awkward, and all of it requires a closer look if I'm going to actually show up in the world in the way that I want to.
And it's so fascinating to me to think about it because at the moment that first happens, it's only awkward for you.
Oh yeah,
because he doesn't care. He doesn't know.
He doesn't care. He doesn't know. Yeah, exactly right. He doesn't know.
He has no idea. So it's only awkward for you, but the awkwardness continues to go up as time goes on in all of these things when we just let them sit and when we don't address the issue. And it's so much like any other problem, right? Like you try to ignore problems and they never go away. They just sort of pile up or get bigger until, I don't know, you get to some, I guess, break moment where you say, okay, I got to just rip the Band-Aid off here and tell this guy that he's been calling me the wrong name for 6 months. And that's going to be weird, but here we go.
Yeah, I think that is 100% true. But awkwardness specifically, one of the lines I often say is the avoidance of awkwardness increases awkwardness.
Yeah.
And it's 100% true because we've all been in that situation where there was a misspeak or a misstep and everyone's kind of like looking at each other, the beady eyes like zipping the room. And we're like, someone just say something. Someone just address the elephant in the room. And until that first person finally does, we're all just feeling the tension in the air and hoping that it goes away. But it is worse with awkwardness for sure. But it's true of a lot of discomfort emotions.
So it seems like the awkwardness manifests from, this sort of idea of like roots in how we develop self-consciousness and how we start to think about other people's opinions more than our opinions. Where is that root and how does that sort of begin to grow in a person?
Yeah, great question. And I think a helpful starting point just for language purposes is to define what does it mean to be awkward in the context of this conversation? What does it mean to experience this emotion? So awkwardness is an emotion that we feel when the person that we believe ourselves to be, our true self, our true identity, is momentarily facing a gap between the person who is on display. In other words, who we are for a moment is different than who they see. And so awkwardness being an emotion of discomfort for sure, but the other component that contributes to awkwardness in particular is that it's a social emotion. So if I am practicing for our interview or doing some research and I mispronounce your last name, but I do that in the privacy of my own office and no one is there to hear it, I don't generally feel awkward about that.
Right.
But if I do it right here on this podcast and you're like, oh, Henna, that's not it, that might invite some awkwardness because there is another person involved, or in your case, an audience, a listener is involved. It's a social emotion, meaning it's something we experience uniquely when there are others involved. So as it relates to the root of it, it is a self-conscious emotion. I love that you already kind of ticked this box. It is an emotion of self-consciousness, meaning when we are young, so adolescent age, it usually kicks up about 8 or 9, according to psychologists. 8 or 9, early adolescence, we start to look for who we are through the lens of who other people see, which is sort of the cursory definition of self-consciousness. When we start to look for our identity through the lens of who do other people see? And more importantly, do they like who they see? Am I fitting in with these social norms? You'll notice if you've got young people in your life, kind of less than age 8, they don't generally care that much. Not usually. They're just swinging their hips in the kitchen, singing as loud as they can, and they give no hoots about who's watching, whether it looks good. But we start to hit that early adolescence, and all of a sudden that changes. We're scanning, do people like this or not? And so once that brain development starts to occur, the emotion of awkwardness is suddenly a new emotion that we start to contend with in our day-to-day lives.
It's really interesting. So you can see my kids over here on the side of my screen. So I run the gamut of 7 to 12. And so I'm living this right now where my 7-year-old is very outspoken, doing, total goofball, like loud, doesn't care at all. And I can see the 12-year-old and the 9 going on 10-year-old. I can see their self-consciousness creeping in. I can see them sneak off and do their hair in the morning. I can see them like trying to figure out, should I wear this shirt or this shirt, in the mornings. And I'm like, oh man, that part of me is like, oh, the innocence is dying. And part of me is like, how do I support them through this? Because this is an emotional thing. Like, how do I help them, know that it is okay to be who they want to be? Those are the kind of the things that I'm grappling with, and why, again, from a selfish standpoint, why I wanted to talk to you today.
Yeah. No, well, first of all, right there with you, I have a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son, 8th and 6th grade. So we're talking about social acceptance being super important right now. Yeah, I'm with you, like all the way in it. And the truth of the matter is for healthy, neurotypical humans, this is socially and developmentally appropriate, right? Our brains are hardwired for social acceptance. This is our reptilian caveman brain that says, I want to stay in the tribe. Please don't exile me, right? I want to belong. This is still the same brain we have today. Social acceptance is still a very real need across the board, but it is around certain inflection points. Middle school is a big one, really big one. High school to a degree as well. But then even for adults, when you enter a new relationship, when you go to college for the first time and you're meeting your dorm mates for the first time, when you get that first new job, when you take that first new promotion, every inflection point in our career, every transition point, we kind of experience middle school self again, because all of a sudden the certainty is gone. And awkwardness lives in uncertainty. It lives in uncertainty when we can't completely, calibrate our expectations on how this is going to go or what this other person will think. We can't predict, and that's life. We can't predict. So when those situations become less comfortable, less certain, and we don't know how other people will receive us or respond to us, that tendency to look externally for who we are and feel very awkward when it doesn't match, that kicks up in every one of those moments.
Yeah. So this comes up in the work that I do around helping people make, monumental career changes, right? Like people in their 30s, 40s have kids, have houses, have cars, and now have this inner turmoil and want to change, but they maybe wouldn't characterize it as awkwardness, but it's that uncertainty of how do I make this change? The right path is not certain for me. And it's so interesting that people who are in their 30s and 40s, we have gained so much confidence and so much ability, skills. We should be at the top of our game saying, I can handle anything. But I would say that I would characterize the thing that stops people the most is the idea of what will other people, this kind of FOPO, fear of other people's opinions.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about how that, those two things actually kind of correlate with each other. The idea that we gain confidence, but we also, our desire to be accepted continues to grow.
Yeah, I love FOPO. A friend of mine, a speaker friend and I are big fans of Michael Gervais, right? He kind of talks about that a lot.
That's exactly right.
And, when we think about this, there's an image I have in the book where it's essentially a teeter-totter, because you're exactly right. Even though experience and wisdom and confidence go up, as that goes up, our tolerance for professional risk-taking often goes down. And the reason for that, just in its most simplified form, is there is more at stake. There is suddenly more at stake. So that in the talk that I do for the TEDx and some of my keynotes, I share a graph where in a lot of ways, our development is very similar to a fitness journey, meaning it is not linear, it is logarithmic. So I'll try to explain this in simple terms. Yeah. It's on a curve, right? It's on a curve where at the beginning, our leaps are more quantum. When you're a beginner on any sort of fitness journey, you can start making those big early gains quickly. Same thing if you start a diet or nutrition program. The big early gains are easy, but then you keep going and all of a sudden you hit that place in our intermediate level of success right at the beginning where you hit that training plateau, where all of a sudden you have to put a bit of extra muscle, a bit of extra something in order to keep going. We can plot the same things professionally in our career. When we're early, those big early gains are easy. We're making mistakes. No big deal. It's expected. We're in this learning development mode. And then we get further along in our career and suddenly we're making mistakes not only on our own, but in front of people with KPIs and success metrics and our title on the line, right? And so in the words that I use, I like to call it, we get to a point where we need to then cross the cringe chasm. There's something there. There's an inflection point that we need to jump over to keep going. But it is very natural that once you've created some goodness in your life and in your career, some wins, you've stacked some wins. Now, when you're trying to hit that next level, when you take that risk, you are threatening disapproval. You are threatening people won't like this as much as they did before because I'm trying something new. I'm trying to play bigger. And people start to play a game where they are more concerned with protecting their existing wins rather than crossing to where they need to go for self-improvement. So that fear of people's opinions kicks up. What if they don't like it and I lose all the wins I've accumulated so far? They start to play a very safe game, but it's 100% correlated. And usually it's protection of what they've already accumulated.
Yeah, it's sort of the same force as in any organization,
Sure.
right? I mean, you get to a certain level and, you know, Apple's a very innovative company and gets to a certain level, and all of a sudden the decisions start to be made to protect the level that they've gotten to rather than continue to innovate and push the envelope. I talk a lot about like personal creative destruction, and use the example of like what Netflix did, where they had their business, their DVD business, and it was just printing money, but they saw the future in streaming. And so they just basically trashed their
business. Yeah.
Their cash cow, right? To go all in on streaming. And they had a rough few years, but came out of that 10x better and in a transformative place. And that was really awkward for their entire executive team, for a good few years.
Right. I'm sure they were telling the executives, like, all the investors, what are you doing here? Right. Like exactly. you are no good at your job. And I think the one distinction I want to make here, because there certainly are tons of parallels between just fear and discomfort and, how is awkwardness different than just being uncomfortable? And where I really want to draw a specific distinction here is right now, today, we are living in a world that is optimizing for social smoothness. And so the specific emotion of discomfort. So not just, I need to get a little uncomfortable and take this personal risk in, the comfort of my own home, but actually risks that involve other people speaking up, speaking out, innovating and kind of tinkering in your garage is one thing, but to innovate with a team member who may not agree with you or like what you have to say requires a social element. And increasingly what I've observed is that people don't have to be social if they don't want to. We order our food on DoorDash or on Toast Tab. We don't have to call the restaurant. My 13-year-old daughter, when we went to pick up a friend the other day, my phone didn't really have good signal. We kind of live in the country. And I said, can you go ring the doorbell? Let her know we're here. She's like, what do you mean? What do you mean ring the doorbell? Just text here. And I was like, I can't. She's like, can you go further up the road? Like, oh my God, no, right? Like this is insanity. But this is the world. People date this way through swiping. We don't have these small moments of social interaction and social happenstance in the frequency that we did before. And when it was more frequent, there was more opportunities to practice. Oh, I didn't expect that from that person. Oh, they said something that I didn't see coming, right? They were just little moments of getting to practice reading somebody else's facial cues or how they were going to react. Even when we're in front of people now, in the grocery store line, we're down on our phone, right? Yeah. When we're at the coffee shop, we've got our headphones in. And so what I am really passionate about, you can probably hear it as my voice ratchets up here, right? What I'm very passionate about is this requires intention today. We cannot engineer all of our social musculature away. We are becoming weak when it comes to social fitness at work and at life. And so we need to really be careful about when we do these things with others. It's really a different animal altogether.
So how do we, I wanted to save some of the tactics for later, but let's just go. Yeah. And I want to get some of your story later about how you have changed careers, but let's just roll with the tactics. I mean, okay, Henna, you're telling me that I need to embrace these awkward moments and I need to develop some skills around this, because in order to break through, if I want to grow and I want to continue on my path, or I want to level up, this is a barrier. So how do we get around? How does Mike or how does somebody else get around these things and level up their social prowess, as you were calling it? Yeah,
twofold. First is self-awareness, but around this particular emotion, right? I think you and I are both enthusiasts of the role self-awareness plays in all sorts of personal growth and development, but around this specific emotion. So again, awkwardness is a social emotion. Embarrassment is a social emotion. So unpacking that requires an exploration of our relationship with approval. So I grew up in a South Asian household where doing things that stuck out we're always kind of like, no, let's buff those away, right? Like, don't be too loud here, or don't talk about money here, or, things that were sort of perceived as jagged. It was like, no, let's smooth out. My name is Henna. I grew up in the early 80s where everybody else was Jessica and Samantha and Jennifer. And, they all had peanut butter and jelly for lunch. And I had Pakistani food that smelled very aromatic in the cafeteria. And so much of my origin was buffing out these bumps. And so it's awareness first of, where does this come from? What are the stories that I've been conditioned for my whole life? And could I potentially work to rewrite new ones? My other favorite awareness thing that is sort of a piece of research most people aren't aware of is I love to explore with clients and with teams, people's relationship with something called vicarious embarrassment. So if you're not familiar with vicarious embarrassment, it is a specific type of embarrassment that we experience that is actually very closely tied to a specific type of empathy. So you'll know it if I describe it. Essentially, let's say that, Mike, you went to a seminar of some sort. You're going to watch this keynote speaker who you think is awesome. He walks up to the stage and he's got toilet paper hanging out of the back of his pants. And you're like, oh my gosh, right? Some people will go, oof, that's embarrassing. But they'll continue to watch the speaker and they'll move on.
Right.
Other people, they're dying in their seat, right? They're like, oh my God, like I cannot believe I'm having the full body sweats. Like this guy doesn't even know, right? They cannot function. They can't even listen to the guy anymore. It's just taken them over. And so there's a difference between these two things. One of these is being embarrassed for someone, but like you kind of talked about at the beginning, he's not embarrassed. He doesn't even know, right? You're embarrassed for them. The other type is being embarrassed with them. Like you literally are taking it on as a full body feeling. And why that's important to note is if you are high on this particular type of empathy, it's called easily empathetically embarrassed. If you take on other people's social pain so hard that it becomes your own, then you will always operate from the assumption that everyone is looking at you that way with that level of intensity. And it makes it very hard to take the chances that you want to take to get out of your own way and take some of the risks that you may want to take in the future.
So I'm assuming, and I know where that can go, assuming, but that type of person, in your work, you're able to sort of bucket them, and I would think that they would have the hardest time making a breakthrough.
Yeah, they can. And here's the rub. Empathy is amazing. I'm not here to engineer empathy out of anyone. It's just bringing awareness to this specific brand of empathy. And, I'm a little tough love with people to say, if they know that they have toilet paper sticking out of their pants and you're taking that on, it's kind of an act of generosity. You have that empathy where you're feeling with that person. But if they're not worried about it, let's say even they discover that it's there, but they're still not worried about it. They just pull it out and they move on and you're still stuck in it. Then that's actually a sneaky little form of judgment.
Yeah.
And that's worth examining because that means it's going to be, again, that much more work to get out of your own way. The other fun little test that just makes people smile is a little at-home test you can do is, how do you feel about cringe comedy? So Borat, 40-Year-Old Virgin, America's Funniest Home Videos, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Some people love these shows. These are shows that are essentially designed to laugh at social awkwardness or social interactions gone wrong. Some people just laugh, then they go to bed. Other people, I know people who are like, I cannot climb out from under the comforter. I am so uncomfortable. It's a signal that you're a little high on that particular empathy. And again, it's not a bad thing. It just is useful to examine how it may be blocking you from taking some of your own forward steps when you need to.
Any other techniques around the self-awareness piece of this? I think of like what we do a lot is obviously we journal about everything with my clients. We try to really get to the root of what people are running away from. Anything like that or other cues people can be aware of?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the techniques that work in other sort of doing a retroactive probably apply here too. When you do have a situation that brought up very intense feelings of awkwardness, cringe, embarrassment, just take the 2 minutes to do a little bit of a self-assessment there. What caused those feelings? what were the expectations I had going into it and what actually happened. So I mentioned awkwardness exists between these two identities. It also exists when subconsciously or consciously we have expectations for how that interaction was going to go, and it sort of went in a different direction. And so having just some relaxed tendencies around expectation management is very helpful. I don't think any of us set out to take a walk in the morning and trip on the sidewalk. That's really not anybody's plan. But when we understand that our expectations are things like this will happen, and because we're humans living around other humans, things like this will happen, we can start to relax a little bit. But I agree with you. I think it's slowing down long enough to journal or to speak into the room. Where did I feel this intensity of this emotion? And what expectations did I assign to how that was going to go, how that person was going to react? My other just favorite thing is I love the research from Dan McAdams out of Northwestern University. He really encourages people after these types of situations to look at something as, am I telling myself a contamination story or am I telling myself a redemptive story? And this really has to do with when an experience occurs and you're thinking about, do I want to do something the next time? Is it stopping you? Did it contaminate the future experience? I spoke up in a meeting at work. I thought I had a great idea. It was promptly shut down and they looked at me like I was insane. I felt super embarrassed and awkward. Contamination story is I'm never going to do that again. Learn the hard way that I'm going to keep my mouth shut, right? That contaminated the future potential to do such a thing. Versus a redemption story is actively and intentionally looking for the good in that embarrassing situation. Didn't go how I hoped it would. The person didn't respond the way I thought they might, but I tried, right? I lifted my hand up. I call it looking for gifts in the garbage. I tried the thing that I don't normally do. Can we actually stop and celebrate those? And I think that technique is true of most emotions of discomfort, but it's one that we don't tend to employ enough with embarrassing and awkward situations specifically.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
If you had to put a number, like a percentage on how much of the downside of these embarrassing moments or these awkward things, or just trying to take a plain old, micro risk, are pent up in our head versus the actual risk. This idea that we think everybody's watching us. But really, you've probably seen the meme where everybody else is actually looking around at their own thing or their phone and nothing happens.
Yeah. That's there's names for this stuff. So percentage wise, it changes. I think the pandemic definitely contributed to the numbers as it relates to all of this. But the phenomenon that you're describing, just for those who aren't familiar, is the spotlight effect, which is we think people are paying much closer attention to us than they are. But actually, there's a phenomenon that people are less familiar with that I think is pretty fun. And it's actually called the pratfall effect. So as it relates to risk-taking, the pratfall effect is a little bit different in that what it tells us is that if you are someone who generally is seen as smart, competent, capable, and you commit a little blunder or a little misstep or have an embarrassing moment or you say something that makes people cringe, if you are generally seen as someone competent with aptitude and you do that, the irony is you are not seen as less capable or competent or smart. You're actually seen as more warm and likable. And people don't believe that. They're like, how? How is that? Because that little bit of humanity makes you human again. It knocks you off the perfect proverbial never gets it wrong pedestal. Now, again, you do have to generally be someone who has exhibited some level of competence, capability, skill at work. I don't suggest that you're brand new on the job and you spill coffee all over yourself on purpose, right? But you have to understand that often people incorrectly confuse awkwardness with ineptitude. They worry, if I come across as awkward at work, everyone is staring at me and they're going to think I'm inept. So the spotlight effect, Tom Gilovich's spotlight effect tells us not everyone is staring at you. As you said, they're more concerned with themselves. They've already worried about, are people staring at me, right? And a little bit of well-placed blunder, misstep, typo, misspeak, error, as long as you're generally someone who shows up and does a good job, actually makes you more warm and likable. The key is actually leaning into that. Wow, that was embarrassing, right? Hey, that was a cringe. That was awkward. When you can actually lean into that bit of humanity, it actually has upside and very little to no downside, as long as it's not directly tied to your skills at work.
Yeah, there's probably a magnitude effect there, obviously. Yeah. What about techniques for leaning into that, right? Some people are so buttoned up and they're so perfectionist, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they have a very hard time doing something like that. That would be really natural for me to do. Like I can make fun of myself, no problem. For whatever reason, I have that skill, but a lot of people I deal with don't. So what about techniques or how we nudge people in that direction?
Yeah. I'm grateful for your choice of the word skill, because I am a bit done with the narrative of we either have these things or we don't, right? All of these are skills that can be learned. Social fitness is a skill. Mental fitness is a skill. These are all actionable things that we can do and improve on the daily basis. So number one, I just want to put shine a brighter spotlight on it, is the naming it. When it comes to awkwardness, I cannot emphasize the power of naming it, because we are all waiting for someone to just say the thing. So quick story. One of the stories I tell early in the book is when the pandemic, finally, the worst of it started to lift, restrictions started to be less so. I had one of my first in-person client meetings with a prospective leader for whom I was trying to do a large-scale training project. This was in person. I hadn't seen people in a while, right? This was a period where none of us had seen people in a while. And so I'm meeting with him. I give him 15 minutes of what I would describe as my finest sales pitching. I spent 14 years in staffing. Your girl knows how to sell. I'm like, okay, I got it. I'm nailing this. He puts his hand up in front of his face and I'm like, yes. And I give him a massive high five. And his eyes literally kind of go glazed. And he looks at me and goes, Henna, I was putting my hand in front of my face because I was trying to get you to stop. And I was like, oh my God, I have completely forgotten how to human. I've completely forgotten how to human. And this seems like a nice moment to remind folks, this is not just for introverts. I am an extrovert, through and through extrovert. And I was mortified. I was embarrassed. And the good news is, having been in this research and done this work, the very first thing I said as soon as I could get something out of my mouth was, wow, that was awkward.
Yeah.
Super cringe. I'm so sorry. Totally misread that one, right? But by admitting it right away, we were able to immediately let it go and laugh it off. There was no, wow, Henna's an idiot, right? Both of our shoulders relaxed. We were able to move on. This can be true in many, many, many circumstances. It just takes that one person to name it. I have a story in the book about Bob Russo, who worked for IBM. Now, again, this was an environment on his team where they had done some testing for psychological safety, right? You have to know kind of who's in the room.
Right.
But his boss in a meeting said something that just did not land. The air became thick with awkwardness. People are kind of looking around at each other. But this boss had sort of embraced this philosophy. And he says, and this is his words, I don't know if it's going to be everybody's cup of tea, but he said, well, that just went over like a fart in church. Right?
Yeah, I've heard
but
that.
Immediately, everybody's bodies relax. And you're like, it's okay to get it wrong in front of each other. It's okay that didn't land, right? And it creates this environment where everybody can move on. We can move through it. We can enjoy what comes after it. It's when we leave it at that stage of pretending like it didn't occur that the grip strength is very difficult to let go of. So naming it is one. I'll share one more and then we can kind of dissect those. The other one is really just conditioning. This is a repetitions thing through and through. And I believe this to my very bones. I think a lot of the reason people have a hard time managing awkward conversations in the moment is not a lack of knowing. It's a lack of conditioning. Again, our worlds are optimized for smoothness. We don't have to have these conversations if we don't want to. If you work remote, you really don't have to share your missteps or blunders. So some of this is making it intentional. I tell leaders at the beginning of meetings, have a bad idea brainstorm where you purposely are sharing ideas that are unrealistic. Probably can't ever happen, but share them anyway. Or cracked egg stories. What's something you royally screwed up in the last 2 weeks or that went, grossly awry? Share those. But if we don't create the space, if we don't practice getting those things out in moments where it's not life or death, right? In the low stakes moments, then in the high stakes moments, it is almost nearly impossible to tolerate. We can't really tolerate those higher intensity emotions when we don't even give airtime to what they might feel like in a lower intensity moment.
So I want to ask about naming awkwardness for a second. It
Yeah.
strikes me that you were very intentional about using that word rather than, I don't know, a myriad of stronger words like screw up, F up, all of these other things, right? Because awkwardness strikes me as, okay, I could say something awkward, but I could also take a risk and put myself out there about a real idea that I have that gets shut down or laughed at or whatever. And so was that word intentionally used to kind of soften this idea and try to be a little bit more playful with these mistakes, if you quote unquote mistakes?
Yes, and right. I think so. I don't care for the words, screw up or F up or whatever, because they're stronger. I think awkwardness and embarrassment, what they have in common, or cringe, is that they're universal emotions experienced by everyone. And this may be sort of next part of the conversation, but they're generally not who we are. They're emotions that we feel, right? I don't much like it when people define themselves as awkward as a trait of identity, right? There's no such thing as a factually awkward person.
Yeah.
FYI, y'all, there's no such thing as a factually awkward person. It is subjective. It is up to us to deem a person so. So when you say I am awkward, that is a statement of opinion. Awkwardness is an emotion, the same way embarrassment is an emotion, the same way cringing is a verb, right? Or, in the modern day, cringe is a noun as an emotion. But these are emotions. They are something that come and go. It's not a mark of who we are. And I think when we use, I'm a screw up or something, that language is pretty limiting.
Right.
It also depends on the conversation, right, Mike? I don't want to oversimplify. This is context dependent. If you have an idea that you're really passionate about, maybe this is not, well, I feel really awkward that I said that. Maybe the awkwardness emotion comes in when you need to double down. So it may not be in that moment, well, you didn't respond how I thought it was. That was awkward. Maybe it's something a little lighter, like that wasn't the reaction I expected from you, but okay, right? Like, let's keep going. Or, I have to admit that wasn't the reaction I expected, but I'm curious to dive into that a little more, right? It's very context dependent about when you name it. But generally speaking, if it's pretty out there, if it's in the air, that there's this sort of tension of awkwardness in the air, it can be very helpful to name it as long as it's something where it feels appropriate to do so.
Interesting. So we've been talking about kind of like the things that the individual can do. But obviously you work with teams and leaders, and it strikes me that leaders have to set the tone and create essentially the psychological safety for awkwardness to not be a fatal issue, right? Like I think about, when the idea of, this is obviously a personal story, but like, when you meet somebody for the first time, or you're in a 3-way meeting and you just start talking to somebody and the next person doesn't quite remember somebody's name or whatever, the idea that you step in and you say, hey, Jeff, you make it like really obvious that this person's name is Jeff. So you save your buddy the awkwardness.
Yeah.
Like a leader has to set the tone here. What do you work with at the team level for doing that?
I love that example that you just gave, because at the team level, being willing to stay in the awkward conversations is such an act of generosity. I remember for the book, I interviewed Leanne Davey, who's an organizational psychologist. She works a lot with teams and collaboration and team conflict. And she's, kind of in her research has found that there are literally team members now that are so uncomfortable that somebody will have a giant green thing in their teeth and they won't say anything to the other person because it's too awkward for them. They're not even the one with the stuff in their teeth, but it's too awkward for them to say it. And they will let their teammate walk around with green in their teeth, right? It's gotten to that point. And so you're right. I think leaders do have the responsibility to create an environment where they model by example, which is, again, takes even more intention if you're not in an office and if you're decentralized, modeling by example, what it means to admit their own blunders, missteps, embarrassing moments, what it means to allow space to bring those up. Again, I think where I see the biggest opportunity is intentionality. Back in the office days when we all worked in offices, or even when we all just gathered more as human beings in public spaces, there was just more opportunity for those things to happen naturally. People would just find out, or they would see you, and then you were able to kind of move through them and realize, this is shared humanity. Everyone experiences this. We don't see that stuff as easily anymore. So leaders have an additional responsibility now to create space for these, again, cracked egg stories, bad idea brainstorms, missteps, screw up stories, whatever you want to call them. But it is also just slowly, and this is not something that can be done in one meeting, it's slowly creating the psychological safety through example. So in the example of Bob Russo's boss, he was at a leadership level where he could say something like, that went over like a fart in church. But by doing so, it essentially let every single person in that meeting know that it was okay to try something, say something, and it potentially going wrong. That was a permission slip to everyone else, but that does have to begin at a leadership level. And you cannot say, hey, it's okay for people to blunder and have awkward moments and talk about them and then punish them, right? Like you have to be willing to actually let people explore those edges and have it be okay. Some people say, yeah, we want people to bring their whole selves. We want them to have missteps and blunders, but then they're not actually okay. They're punished for it. So I think it's just having the awareness of, do you actually believe that this is the environment we're trying to create?
I want to segue over into a little bit of your story because I want to hopefully pull back this idea of kind of authenticity, purpose, and using awkward moments for growth. So you've described yourself as a recovering overachiever. I deal with a lot of people in that category as well.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about why you describe yourself that way and maybe some of the context around what you were doing in kind of your previous life.
Yeah, I think most of my clients too identify with that term. So firstborn to immigrant parents, they came to this country with very little, worked their entire butts off to give my sister and I a great life, which they did. I'm so grateful to them. But, any child of immigrant parents kind of knows this story where they come here for a better life. They do everything. They sacrifice everything for the future success of their children in hopes that in return, their kids don't waste that. Right? Don't mess it up. We did all this for you. So I was, queen of get all straight A's, get into a good college, get great grades in college, get the great big job. So, I did all that. I made my parents very happy. Generally, I think either through their conditioning or through my own just personality was somewhat self-driven, but I got the big shiny job at Ernst & Young. At that time, I was working 1 million hours, a week because it was just busy season all the time. And I burned the candle at both ends pretty hard, but eventually just realized that audit was not for me. Like I'm too chatty to be an auditor, pretty clearly to anybody who knows me. So I made my first career pivot. I love your term of career breaker. I'm going to steal that from now on. I'm going to be a career breaker instead of a pivoter.
Please
I broke the first career, and I did make a pivot though. It wasn't a 180. It was a pivot to the direct hire executive search staffing industry where I focused a lot on finance and accounting. But that was the first one. But there I got so used to just constantly running, right? Straight A's, a lot of hours in accounting. So even though I wasn't required to, I started running over there, right? It was like constant hours, constant everything. And here's the thing, it was all very successful. On paper, it was the ultimate success story. And achievement became my identity. It just, for a long time, was who am I if not the achiever, if not the person who is top of their company, if not the person with the best grades, if not the person who earns XYZ accolades. And my moment that broke me, if I can maybe just put it in here, I know this is a theme that you talk a lot with your guests about, is in that job, I was there for 14 years. I loved it. I honestly loved it until the day I left. I loved it. But I remember one day I was working from home and I went out to check the mail and I looked up and I saw a cloud. And I'll never forget, I saw this cloud and I was like, that cloud looks like a bear. And in that next breath, I thought to myself, when was the last time I looked at a cloud?
Wow.
And I realized it had been 10 years. You know, in that job, I got married. I had my 2 kids who were babies and toddlers most of the time. I had not looked up. So overachiever was not just at work, but I wanted to be a great mom who for the longest time was like pureeing organic food for I mean, God, I think about it now and I'm like, why? Why did I torture myself? But I tried to be all the things. I wanted to be the achiever because I didn't know who I was if I wasn't. There was no sense of I am enough unless I'm doing all of these things. And so I'll be honest, Mike, I'm still in daily recovery from that identity. But, pivot number 2 came a few years ago. And I'm proud to say that the recovery feels easier and easier now every week.
So you were living a version of success that you didn't necessarily author in that first phase, right? And again, coming from a great place, right?
No,
Parents who sacrificed for you and wanted the best for you and said, here is the path, right?
Yep.
You get good grades, you work hard, you get a good job.
Yeah.
How did you start to author your own version of success? And obviously we're all still working on it. I've broken my career 6 times. I think I will probably continue to break it. But I feel much better about my version of success. What was that process like for you? And how did you start to take some of the things you wanted more seriously?
I use the word pivot a lot because I think a lot of times when people think about breaking their career, they think, oh my gosh, I need to dismantle everything I know and start, open a bar in the Caribbean. Sounds awesome. I didn't do that, right? I didn't do that. I tried to think, okay, what skills do I have that are adjacent that I might be able to explore? And so I would say my answer is twofold, is always planting seeds before you make any decision. Neither career was peace out over here. Now I'm going over here. It was, how can I start learning more about XYZ? Who can I talk to that has made a similar pivot? I am a voracious networker and my network has informed much of my career change decision making because I would try to find people who had done something similar. And we often are like, I don't want to bother people. Bother people. People are more than happy if you say, hey, I currently work in accounting. I see that you moved to staffing and I'm really curious about that transition. Would you be willing to spare 5 minutes? Most people are more than happy to say yes. And often in those cases, I would send them a Starbucks gift card, or if they had a book, like, can I buy your book, right? Some sort of show of support, but never go in parachuteless, right? Have a sense of what you're walking into. But I would say number 2, and maybe most poignantly and sort of in the theme of the book, is I think I'm just a perpetual baby giraffe. Like, I don't expect that I'm going to walk well. I don't have that expectation anymore. And part of my gratitude to my parents and my upbringing as a firstborn of parents that came to this country was they came to the land of opportunity. I was the firstborn and they're like, oh, let's try all the opportunities. Dance, karate, jazz. Like, I did a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I got good at anything, but I did a little bit of everything, which at the time I probably protested a lot, but I was a beginner all the time, which has been so helpful to me in embracing the awkwardness of starting something new because I knew that space. I was familiar with that space. I knew what it was like to not be steady. And that lack of steadiness didn't scare me. I knew it kind of came with the territory. So I think that mindset was very helpful in being able to break my own career a couple times and honestly take the chances that I have in the last few years to get me to where I am with my business now.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
We see, people get on the optimization train, right? That optimize their lives for, sort of wherever they are or whatever they think success is, and they don't. What atrophies along that path is that baby giraffe advantage or skill of being resilient, being flexible, being able to see different paths, place a few different, micro bets. People often think, okay, I want to change my career. I need to make one decision, and that decision has to work. And that's a lot of pressure, to put yourself through. So I think there's so much to that. And I think where the tie-in with awkwardness is when you do embrace that, you're embracing a form of resiliency, a form of being able to work in uncertainty that I think is a critical skill. Like you called it a skill before. I think it's a skill, and I think you can work on it. And the other place awkwardness shows up is so people are in their jobs and they want to do something else. Well, you need to be able to create space in order to explore what you might do. And that means first you have to start pushing back on some of the norms at work, and that can get awkward.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So think the idea of like saying, no, I'm not going to show up to these optional meetings, or I'm going to have a conversation with my boss and say, I'm not I need to protect the first 2 hours of my day for XYZ reason. Like doing this is really scary for people. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that angle of it within your research and what you've seen.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It is the part that I think this speaks to the most is doing this is scary for people because it's in a social environment, right? It is not that hard to do things that, success isn't guaranteed when we're by ourselves. It's that social environment bit. And again, I can't emphasize that it's scarier now because we're not doing it as much. If we are only having meetings with our team on Zoom, one could argue that when we have a team meeting on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, that we are interacting with each other. But guess what? You can also shut your camera off for a minute if you need to. You can also go on mute, right? You can't do that in real life. And so there's still a level of smoothing away that we get to do that we don't think about, but it has a downside. My favorite metaphor for this is, so I learned how to ski as an adult. I went skiing a couple times as a kid, but basically I didn't know how to ski, right? So my husband is an avid skier. So I learned how to ski a couple of years into our marriage. I was maybe 25, 26 when we first started learning how to ski, and tried to do a group lesson. It was a disaster. And I remember I had a private lesson, and my instructor was the best. And I don't think any other instructors did it this way. But we get on the mountain and he goes, we're going to go to the most crowded part of the mountain right now. And all we're going to do is fall. I'm just going to keep pushing you over, and you're just going to learn how to get up. And I was like, what? This sounds like misery. Like, teach me the pizza pie or whatever the thing is. Like, what are you leasing? That sounds like hell. Why are we doing that? No other instructor was doing that. Like going to the most crowded part of the mountain and pushing me over. Are you kidding me? And I was like, this guy's a lunatic. But that's what we did. He taught me how to fall. That's all we did for like a half an hour. And he did it in the most crowded part of the mountain where everybody was watching me.
Yeah.
I'm an adult too, right? Keep this in mind. It was the greatest gift this man could have given me, right? Because I wasn't scared of falling in front of other people. I did it so many times. What else? How much worse can it get, right? I did it so many times. And he trained me for the scenarios that I feared the most, right? I was afraid of being embarrassed when the 4-year-old kid is skiing past me and I'm on the ground, unable to get up. So it's like I had purposely created an opportunity to rehearse my most embarrassing situations on the mountain. And to me, that is our opportunity, is how can we create equivalents of those situations at work so that we feel like those don't have the grip strength when they inevitably do happen. Because you will have your equivalent of, the 4-year-old skiing next to you in the office and you feeling like a moron. Just can you condition your mental muscles to be a little more ready for them? You can't predict that, but you can prepare for it.
I love that metaphor. That's a fantastic story. It's great. Like, it just makes you think about how do you replicate that in a work setting, in a personal setting, the reps at getting over that awkwardness. And I mean, that's a center of, when you really think about it, that's a center of like cognitive behavioral therapy too. The idea that go do the thing that you're scared of in order to get over it. Like that's the central premise of it, which is really, really interesting. I imagine the other piece to this, so the reps is a big piece, but also the mental calculus of sort of what do you care more about? What you talk about this idea of approval or improvement. Talk to us about that a little bit, because it seems fitting right here as well.
Yeah, this is the core tension. So when we reach a point where, again, let's just use the simplest example. We're in a meeting and we want to raise our hand, or we're in a performance review and we want to say, hey, I want a little more money, right? We've hit that part of the road where we're like, it's do or die, right? Something's got to give. And so the tension we have to navigate is, in that moment when a professional risk needs to be taken, do we allow our deep desire for that other person to approve outweigh whether we personally improve? And so many of us, because again, we're trying to protect our wins, like we talked about before, we will stay on that approval side of the gap. We will say, okay, it's safe over here. I know what to expect. If I don't raise my voice about more money, I'll keep their approval. If I don't raise my hand and say, I don't know about that, or hey, that we're not including the voice of this underrepresented person, if I don't do that, approval is guaranteed. I already know I'm okay over here. If we do, we now hit that cringe chasm moment where I don't know how they're going to respond to what I say next. There's now a gap. And in order for me to go to the improvement side, I just have to be willing to jump. I still don't know how it's going to go, but I have to be willing to jump. And so often what I experience with the highest performers is they know how to do the little jumps, right? Like the little things that help them improve. But everyone at some point is going to hit that pivotal moment where they have to experience all that ick, the potential for it going sorely awry in their belly, and say, okay, I'm just going to do it anyway. The key difference becomes we celebrate that. If it works, awesome. Round of applause for the outcome. I'm happy for you. But are we creating environments in our own, again, social musculature to say, hey, you know what? I said that thing and I said it in the meeting in front of other people. And yeah, I don't know if it got anywhere, if it was even helpful, but I did it and I don't normally do it. So that crossing of the cringe chasm, that's where I want to see some active celebration, because it's easy these days not to. So I want to just make sure we're giving each other the attention and the round of applause it deserves when we actually get out of our own way and do it.
Yep. Love it. Life and growth is about taking risks, and that's the only way it happens. Like there's nothing for no free lunches. You got to step out and do it if you want to grow. And the exclamation point I would put on it is it just always comes back to, you have to get in a mindset where you choose yourself, and choosing yourself is not selfish. Yeah. It's not.
I agree with you. I think, to me, not everyone has an improvement bias. Not everyone needs, if that's not you, that's fine. I'm not here to say everyone jump the cringe chasm willy-nilly. Like, no, I mean, the question becomes, if there's something that matters to you, and you see it over there on the other side of the chasm, that's when you go after it. Just to bring it home. And if you listen to the TEDx, you'll get the end of this story. Finally, a day came where I was like, I'm very uncomfortable about correcting this partner that has called me Helen now for months, but I made a choice that my improvement edge was tied to my identity that I wanted to hold, which is I want to be someone who insists that other people call her the right name.
Right.
That's an identity that I decided I wanted to hold. And that vision, that value I really anchored into was enough for me to muster all the discomfort in my body and say, hey, and this is exactly how I said it. I'll never forget because it was so visceral. Hey, this is pretty awkward for me to say because it's been a few months, but my name is actually Henna. And of course, in that moment, I actually had to navigate his embarrassment.
Yeah, exactly.
Awkwardness, right? Because he was like, oh my God, are you serious? Right? Like, but we were better for it, right? We were better for it. It passed. It didn't linger forever. People think it will, but it often doesn't. And then I was the type of person that I wanted to be. And that's what mattered more to me eventually than anything else.
And it can become a little bonding thing with you, a little joke.
Oh, we laughed about it for months. Months.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, I want to push this to the edge here, and I got a few more questions, like rapid fire questions for you. But first, I want to just we've talked a lot about how you help people and teams, but give us a shout out to your actual business, who you're working with, just describe kind of the ideal setup for you and where you're at your best helping people.
Thank you. I'm a keynote speaker for a living. That is my, 90% of my day job is I'm on stages working with teams, leaders, corporate professionals, sales professionals about improving workplace performance. I would say the two major focus areas are risk-taking and embracing life's frictions, right? So teams, communication, the way that they interact with one another, how we, don't push things under the rug. A lot of my companies that hire me are like, we want to act more as one and not so many disparate separates. And so that's focus number one. Focus number two is around influence and persuasion. So typically that's leaders and sales teams. How do we become more influential and persuasive? And I really anchor into the modern psychology for how we do that. And the way we do it is very different than it was a few years ago. So I have a lot of fun with that. But keynotes, training, speaking, a little bit of executive coaching. I have a team of executive coaches that work with me. And just wrote a book too. So author is the new title, but I have a lot of fun in building this business over the last almost 4 years now, 3.5, 4 years has been the hardest, most awesome, most terrifying, most fulfilling, rewarding thing I have ever done in my whole life. And I'm grateful for all of it.
Yeah. You're on your passion, it feels like, or your purpose, I should say. And that's great for me to hear as a host. So the book is called Good Awkward, right? How to embrace the embarrassing and celebrate the cringe to become your bravest you. That's a great title. I love it. I'm going to pick up a copy for sure. And I urge obviously our audience to do. We'll have links to in the show notes and all of that as well. But I want to close this out with some rapid fire questions and get you on your way. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us. But here goes. So is there a recent author or thought leader or influencer that you've come across that has really caught your attention that you think our audience should be paying attention to?
God, this is can I pick 20? I have to just pick one. Recent thought, I have increasingly been obsessed with Ruchika Tulshyan. She's a DEI focus a little bit more, but I love her take on how we have more inclusive conversations at work. She wrote a book called Inclusion on Purpose. And I just think she makes diversity conversations are the most awkward, right? For folks that are not comfortable having them. And I think her approach is very tactical and actionable and makes something that can be very awkward, very doable. And so I've been really appreciating her work.
Excellent. And then besides that book, have you read a book recently, or do you have a book that's maybe had the most influence on you that you want to recommend? You can take it either way, if it's been recent or just something that's really, really had a big influence on you.
I'll share two. The one that I recommend to everybody, and there's a reason it sold 1 million copies, but it's The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay-Stanier. Michael Bungay-Stanier is just a gem of a human and also was kind enough to let me interview him for my book and share some of his awkward stories. But it's a quick read. It's an actionable read. And I think it informs a lot of the curiosity that I bring to, outside of my own coach certification. Just, I like the practical way of how do we all stay more curious and in those uncomfortable conversations longer. Most recently, I'm a big word nerd. I love learning about how the choice of words can impact how we communicate with each other. And I read Magic Words by Jonah Berger, who is a fellow Philly person. He teaches at Penn. And so that one, I really enjoyed the nuance of language choice and how words really affect our behavior.
Two great recommendations. Thank you. Third question. Do you have one piece of advice for someone just starting out in this world, trying to get a foothold in their life? And I'm going to narrow it down. You can't say embrace the awkward.
I won't.
You got to pick something else.
Well, you know what? You said it earlier and I was like, oh man, he took my favorite one, but I'll reinforce it here. Place small bets, micro bets, my whole career. I mean, if I may just brag on myself for a minute, I thought it would take me years to get to where I am right now in my business. I mean, I had some goals. I left at the height of my staffing career thinking, gosh, I hope in 10 years I, get to where I left that career at, because I was very, there was reasons it was time to be done, but I was very successful there. It was very hard to leave. And the fact that in year 2, I blasted through that is 100% a product of staying in the baby giraffe awkwardness, but also repeated small bets. There was no way of knowing how other people would react to certain things unless I tried it in small stakes. And so it was constantly, let me introduce this idea, this program. You all have no idea how many failed programs I have, how many failed things that you'll never hear about them because only the couple people who did them know about them. But always small bets all day, every day. Don't put so much stake in everything that you try. Be willing to try and then throw it away.
Yep. Build your portfolio of small bets. That's how you figure it out. Excellent. I got to throw this one in there because I didn't ask it at the time, but how you made that decision to leave a very successful career. Like, obviously that is scary. A lot of people that I talk to are dealing with the exact same thing. And it is like, I am giving up this to go try to do this other thing that is very unknown.
It was the hardest thing I ever did.
Yeah.
It's the hardest thing I ever did. And I feel like that sounds so hyperbolic. Like at the time of us talking, there's so much trouble in the world that it feels, I don't want to comparative suffer here, but that decision was the hardest thing I ever did because I was at the peak of my success at the time. This was just pre-COVID. I left late 2019. I was working from home 4 days a week. I only went to the office once a week. I could finish my day at 3:30 and get my kids off the bus. I had all the flexibility in the world, loyal clients. I didn't even have to chase them, income. Everything on paper was a 10 out of 10.
Right.
Everything on paper was a 10 out of 10. And I remembered when I even suggested to some of my friends that I was thinking about doing something else, they're like, why? You have the dream gig, right? I had wrapped so much of my identity into being an achiever at that job and the situation I had at that job that leaving felt like the most selfish thing. And ultimately, it boiled down to really two things. There was a voice in me for nearly 2 years that was like, you're capable of more than this. And I tried to ignore that voice over and over. I was like, wow, you have it good, Henna, shut up. Like, you have it good. But over and over, I kept hearing it. And then finally, there was a moment where I had that sort of identity conversation with myself. I said, Henna, you are someone who, as a function of working in staffing, are telling candidates, take the risk that's going to help you meet your full potential. Telling clients, take a risk on this hire that's going to help your team meet its full potential. And I knew I was not living into that truth. I was not taking the risk that was going to help me meet my full potential. And I think finally one day I'm like, you got to choose who you're going to be here. You're a hypocrite. You're a living hypocrite. So is fear going to win or are you going to try this thing? Start to lay seeds. And I laid seeds for about a year before I left. Again, what we talked about at the top. But once the seeds started going into the ground, it was pretty clear to me. I'm like, yeah, it's time.
That's what it comes down to. That pursuit of your highest self versus everything that you know is real and the achievements that you've made. And are you willing to make that trade? Like, that is the mark. That's the high water mark right there.
And I was just going to add, I think in theme of everything we've discussed today, don't expect it to feel comfortable. It was awkward the day I left. It was awkward the day I started the new thing. Making a new website was awkward. Baby giraffe all day, every day. To this day, every time I try something new, it feels that way. Have level set expectations when you're trying to do something like this.
Yeah, and it takes time. All right. What's getting you excited about the next 12 months? You just mentioned we have a lot of discord going on in the world, lot to be nervous and fearful about, but what's got you really excited about the next 12 months?
Well, it's funny. This past year was so focused on, I've never written a book. This was my first book and the book's been so well received. I'm so grateful. There's a couple of awards that I haven't been able to share about yet, but it's been very exciting. I think where I'm excited to see, the last few years, I've tried on some different hats. I did like a very intensive public speaking training program 2 years ago. Last year, it was all about the book. I think what I'm excited to see this year is just what is the next iteration of growth, and will it be something that is, me focused or they focused? I think I've done a lot of learning and input the last couple of years. Now I'm trying to see how can I ripple this out into the world more broadly. I just want to see if I can activate more people. And so I think I'm just excited to see all the people that I talk to and I serve. What are they going to do? Like, what are they going to do with it? And I think I'm hungry for all the potential that my second, third, fourth degree connections have. And I've got this just deep curiosity about how do I activate that next wave of ripples out. And I just feel like people are so poised to do it. People are so smart. They're so ready. Like, they're so hungry. I just hope I can activate something that reaches far beyond one person on a stage.
It's beautiful. And as a new acquaintance of yours, I am really excited to see where you take that mission, and I'm excited to follow it online and wherever else our life takes us. So thank you for sharing your time with us. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to see where you go. Leave us with where you would like people to learn more about you. I know you're on LinkedIn, you got a website. Leave us with some of those links and we'll make sure they're in the show notes for everybody.
Yeah, hennapryor.com is the easiest way to find my website. It'll redirect to the company website, but Henna Pryor in all the places. LinkedIn is my preferred playground. So there, but it's the same on Instagram. And honestly, the book, Good Awkward, it's everywhere books are sold. But if you go to goodawkward.com, you'll see a little bit about the book, some of the endorsements, bonuses, and whatnot. But I love making new friends. And if you send me a LinkedIn request, I will not deny it and I will not make it awkward. In fact, come on in. So I would love to connect with anyone who finds this resonance or useful.
All right, Henna, thank you so much for being with us. I forgot one final question. That is, are you a Phillies fan? Are you a baseball fan? And are you excited for the playoffs here?
I am a bigger Eagles fan, and so a little crushed by this past Sunday's outcome. Yes. And I am a Phillies fan as well, and a little crushed by day before. God, I was traveling, so I've lost track. Yesterday's outcome. But yes, both. And I'll tell you, this is a great time to be a Philly sports fan. This time of year was really fun last year too. So I'm hoping that our outcome continues to trend positive. But there is a reason. I know folks listening to this on podcasts aren't going to see it, but your girl is in green today. And that is not totally an accident. We'll just say that going into the weekend. So there's that.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Have an amazing weekend. Happy Friday. And we will catch up soon.
This was awesome. Thank you.